Hello everybody, my name is Jim Pingle and we are here with the October 2016 Hangout. This month we'll be talking about OpenVPN as a WAN, like using it with a VPN provider, or if you host your own type of thing and you want to send your internet traffic out over it. Just basically a couple different scenarios where you might want to use it as a WAN. First thing this month we'll talk about project news. We'll talk about why you would want to use OpenVPN as a WAN. So go over just a little bit of basic info about VPN providers and picking one, how to get your connection requirements, the kind of information you need to gather from the server side of things, how to create the VPN client on pfSense, assigning that OpenVPN instance as an interface, and then we'll go over Outbound NAT and Firewall rules for that. Talk about some failover scenarios that you might want to employ or prevent. How to do policy routing or selective use, like only sending certain things over the tunnel. How you can control routing and firewall source traffic to whether or not it goes over the VPN. Talk about preventing DNS leaks, how you can enhance your privacy a little bit that way. We'll talk a little bit about inbound traffic and port forwards, and then very briefly go over just how the server setup if you're going to host your own. Not going to get too deep into that, but just kind of the general guidelines of what you need to do, because we've got documentation on how to set that up. But it's maybe not be quite obvious right now, but as we go, you'll see it's very, very easy. Okay. First up is the project news. Just want to celebrate our 10 years of production pfSense. 10 years ago this month, we had our 1.0 and 1.0.1 releases. It was on October 13th for 1.0, and 1.01 was released on October 29th, which would be 10 years ago tomorrow. So surely people were using it in production before then, but officially as our 1.0 release was when we felt it was stable, and off it went. So it's been a good 10 years, and we hope for many, many more. It wasn't out last month, but now our 2.3.2 underscore or patch level 1 or update 1 release is out. It's a security and errata release. Just some minor fixes, OpenSSL patches, some package updates for things that had some vulnerabilities like PHP and libxml and miscellaneous other bugs. I don't know, we might be doing another, like a patch 2 release before too long, or maybe 2.3.3. I'm not sure. There's a couple of things that came out from FreeBSD this week that we're still evaluating whether or not we'll need to do a release for those. So keep an eye out for that as well. We still have our 2.4 alpha snapshots available, and those are getting more and more stable every day. We still don't recommend using them in production yet, but if you want to try it in a lab or a small environment where it wouldn't hurt to break things a little bit, a lot of people are using it just in that sort of scenario, and there's a couple of particularly brave individuals using it for their home, and they're not having too much trouble, but there's still some things we need to polish up before we can move that up to beta. We've got our SG-1000 pre-orders still open. We are rapidly approaching when those are going to be shipping. As I believe it's sometime next month, but we need to get 2.4 out to coincide with that. We got a few other things in the pipe too. We're getting ready to do. Our 24/7 enterprise support, I talked a little bit about that last month. It's still coming very, very soon. Just almost all the stuff blocking us is out of the way there, and we've got our staffing and everything ramping up, so we are in place for that. And that's it for the news. Let's move on along. So first, let's talk for a moment about why you would want to use OpenVPN as a WAN. First up, the main question here is what's on the other side. If you're trying to send your traffic out to the internet, then yeah, you'd want to use it as a WAN. If it's a site-to-site VPN, you may or may not want to treat it that way. A couple of things might be more convenient doing it this way, but others, it could hinder you. In this Hangout, we're going to be focusing on the internet is your, at the other side of the VPN, whether that is through a VPN you're hosting yourself, or whether that is through a VPN provider that you're paying on a monthly basis to get you connectivity. That's up to you. So one thing you need to be aware of, though, is you have to trust the other end of the VPN. Whether you have some sort of a trust because you've got a business relationship with them, or you've got a trust because it's your own equipment, you're running this VPN to them is a means of getting you a secure connection from where you are to the other side. Even though, from that side out to the internet is still unencrypted, you still have to trust them, because if they are compromised or they're doing something, then, it's just as well as you don't even use the VPN at all. It could actually be worse, because somebody could be more specifically targeting you because they know you're using that provider. Whereas they may not be able to intercept your communications, if you are going straight out to the internet through your big provider at home, but if they can intercept through the VPN provider, it's just as bad. So there's a lot to worry about trust there. So you need to be very wary, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides when I get to talking about the VPN providers. So a big reason why people want to use OpenVPNs as WAN is privacy and anonymity. Either they don't want things to be tracked back to their internet connection at home, or them specifically, or they know their ISP or their government, whatever, is doing some sort of tracking, and they don't want to be tracked. They want to keep their private communications private, and they don't want anybody to be able to know it's them. There's always two sides to that coin. There are things that somebody could be hiding good behavior, somebody could be hiding bad behavior. We're just gonna ignore that particular issue here and say, you're doing this for good reasons, because privacy is a great thing, anonymity on the internet is a great thing, and you're just looking to maintain the free and open nature of the internet. Another potential concern is security. Your particular WAN could be untrusted or weak or compromised in some way. So if you don't trust the network from you out to the internet, because somebody could be sniffing that network, or your provider could be doing something fishy, and it's your only choice. You have no other way to get to the internet. Or if you are in a country where the government is doing something to the internet connections, everything runs through them. There's some issues, ethical issues there as well. So you may not trust that what you can get through just plain out to the internet, but you can, tunnel out to this internet, your VPN provider, or your data center, in another country, and you can get a clean path out that way. So you could be, extra security that way. Another good reason, I sort of touched on that a moment ago, is bypassing government censorship, if I can say the word, restrictions or logging. We got to be careful here. I can't tell you to break the law, but there are oppressive governments out there. You may, one of your satellite offices may be in one of those countries. You may have yourself. You may be in one of those countries where either the government is censoring your internet connection, they are putting what you feel are undue restrictions on it, or they're logging everything you do, things like that, and you're trying to get around those restrictions. A VPN provider can help you do that, even though I can't tell you to do that. It's just something that people do use it for. Another one is bypassing region restrictions. So say you're in the United States, but you want to look at a video feed from BBC or whatever. You could hook up to a VPN provider in the UK and get out and hit the BBC from there. Or people in other countries like to try to get Netflix from the United States, but Netflix is really cracking down on that. So if your intention is to do something with Netflix, then you may have to look elsewhere, because they are really cutting back on VPN providers. Anytime they identify one, or they've got tricks to identify them at the network level, even if you run your own. So you just got to be very careful trying to get around that. But things on like YouTube and a lot of other places, you can still kind of work around those if you need to. And again, you have to be careful not to break the laws of your country or the country you're routing through. But don't say I didn't. Don't say I told you to do that. Another good reason for us technical-minded people is to research without revealing the true source of your traffic. So if you want to run like a port scan or a network scan of some kind, but you don't want it to show that it's coming from your particular network connection, you could do that. That could especially come into play if you are, say, a pen tester and you're trying to quote unquote attack one of your customers to run a scan. You may not want it to come to look like it came from your own location. You may want to look like it came from some other country or something you might be trying to test. Some sort of regional list from something like PF Blocker, or you may be trying to test something that you just need to route your connection through some other path to get some other source of traffic originating, or maybe you're doing this for like a college paper or something. You don't want it to come back to yours because maybe your provider doesn't like you doing that, but that sort of thing. Or maybe your whatever network you're on doesn't like you doing that. But yeah, so research is another good purpose there. All right, a little bit about VPN providers. There are lots of options out there, but we don't recommend it or endorse any particular one. We've talked to a couple over the years about partnering up, trying to work out some sort of a relationship there. But at the moment, I don't think we still have anything going there. I'd have to double check on that. But so really, at the moment, we don't endorse any of them. But you're welcome to search. There's a bunch of them out there in all sorts of countries. But you really need to do the research on these. You need to make sure that they offer an OpenVPN option, because OpenVPN is what I'm talking about today. You want to look to find out if they have logging and data retention policies. If you're looking for privacy and anonymity, but your VPN provider logs, then that you may not be getting as much of that as you're hoping for. And some of the providers, their hands are tied by their country or local regulations. So you may have to look around and find a different provider. And some of them are not very forthcoming with that, so you may have to rely on third-party reviews and reports of what they say. Another thing to check is the exit node locations, and see if they've got one in a country you want, or if they have a bunch of them around the world. The more the merrier, especially if they allow you to switch from one to the other without any kind of penalty. So that'd be really nice if you'd be able to, if you want to hit one server one day and then just change a couple of settings and hit another server if you need to. So you need to make sure you can get your traffic where you want it to go, basically. And the last one is probably the most important. You need to look around at what other people are saying about this and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. Make sure that you're getting ready to do business with a company that will not just run away with your money, that they're not logging you, they have good customer service. Basically, just make sure they're an okay company to deal with. So you really need to do some research there, and a good place to check on that stuff is on our forum. We've got several providers that people have posted about on the forum, good or bad, or just do a Google search of the name, and even pfSense, put it in the search too. Just see what you can hit on, and hopefully they have. Hopefully you can find one that's in your area or the area you want to be in that will do what you want. All right. Last option is to roll your own. You can host it in a data center, cloud provider, main office, wherever. If you've got a network, if you got a server somewhere, or even another pfSense instance, like in a cloud provider somewhere, like AWS or something like that, I'm pretty sure you can run one there. May cost you an arm and a leg in bandwidth, but it'll, but that's up to you and between you and the provider. If you got a big data center and you're already paying for bandwidth and things there, and you just want to tack this onto a firewall you've already got there, it might work great. Sort of the general idea is, it ends up like a road warrior VPN, but for your firewall and all the network traffic behind it. So, you've got your VPN provider, you picked it out, and you're trying to figure out how the heck you connect to this thing. Every provider is going to be different. But when you tell it, you've got OpenVPN, there might be some that have different options you can tweak for protocols or ports, or you might have some different levels of encryption, things like that. That, unfortunately, because they are all so different, I can't really offer you any guidance on that part. You want to just make sure you got something like at least AES 128, preferably like AES 256. And it'd be a good thing to have a per user certificate if you can, instead of just a username and password. TLS key auth is really good on top of certificate based auth. The more security you can lump into this thing, the better. The more security you have, it will knock down your performance a little bit. So depending on how much bandwidth you're trying to run through this, you be aware of that. And something I didn't mention before too is if you are running a ton of stuff through here, you need to make sure your hardware is up to spec for it as well. depending on your WAN speed and how much you plan on running through the VPN, or how fast you really care for the VPN to run. If you're running your entire network through it, you're going to have to obviously have more resources available than if you're only running one or two systems through it. Okay, so when you've dealt with all of that, you figured out your encryption, all that other stuff, every provider is going to have a way to get your connection information, whether it is ideally, you want to log into the site and download these things or copy and paste them out of a page on their secure website. I wouldn't like to see these things emailed around because that's an insecure way to transfer this information. So you needed some sort of secure way to get it. So hopefully you're getting it in an encrypted manner, getting it down to your machine. Now, what you might even find that the provider has like a pfSense guide on there and tells you what goes where. But basically, you're going to have a CA certificate at least. You may have a user certificate and a user certificate key, but depending on what options you have, if the provider only does username and password auth, then you just have a username and password. You may not have a user certificate, or you could have both. So you could have one, the other, or both, of your user credentials or a user certificate. TLS key, again, optional. You may have it, you may not. Depends on the provider and their settings. And if they have a sample configuration that they can give you, that would really help you speed up trying to decipher how to connect to it. We don't have a way to import that, but you can just look at it and get an idea of what goes where. And I'll kind of go over that in a little bit, of how to decipher that. So the first thing you do, say you've got all your information, it's saved on your computer. First thing you have to do is import that into your firewall. So you've got, say, your certificate down here. I downloaded several different variations of my the certificate I generated locally here in my lab for this. See here, I've got separate. You could have separate files for your CA certificate, and then I've got my user certificate, my user key, and a TLS key. Over here, I've got an inline configuration where all of this stuff is lumped into one thing. So what I have here is my CA is just like right here, and I can just right click and copy. Same text right here in my CA certificate over here on its own. So I've already got this loaded in this one, but you just go to System, Cert Manager. Here on the CAs tab, you just add and give it a name, and then you just paste in the certificate data out of this file. So let's just copy this, paste in there just like that. And you can make that bigger just to compare if you want to compare that to what I copied, and it's check out the first couple characters of every line, you can tell it's the same. So then you save that, and you'll end up with an entry, it looks like this, where it shows your CA certificate. Then you do the same over here with the certificates tab. Now on the CA, you only have the certificate. Now on your user cert, you will have the certificate and a key. So those are packaged separately in many cases. You might have a CRT file here for the certificate. You might have a key over here separate. Or if you've got an inline configuration, your cert is going to be in the cert tag. And the key in the key tag. And so you just copy the certificate here into the certificate data field, and then and paste it there. And then you copy the private key and you paste it in the private key data field. And when you save that, you'll have your certificate here. And it should even pick up the issuer. That's why you import the CA first and then the certificate after, so it can pick up the issuer better, easier. So you've got all that done, and now we've got our user cert and we've got our CA. So now that we've got that, we got to go over here to VPN and OpenVPN, onto the Clients tab, and then you click the Add button to make a new one. I've got it here already. I'll just open this up. So we want this to be a peer-to-peer SSL TLS, not a shared key. I'm not sure if any of them are even doing shared key because it's very efficient for the server side, inefficient for the server side to do shared key, whereas it's a lot better for them to do SSL TLS and more secure. So most of them opt for doing it that way. Let's see if I can, that's a little bit too narrow. So we've got our protocol is UDP. Most of the time you're going to want UDP. If they give you an option for TCP, you probably don't want to take it because running a VPN over TCP is horribly inefficient. The only time you would want to take a TCP VPN is if for some reason UDP will not work for you. It could be blocked in your area, or you could have a problem in general with getting UDP out, due to something upstream or between you and the VPN provider. So you really want to try for UDP, but if you absolutely positively cannot get UDP to work, then try a TCP option. You gotta, let's see, from here you need to make sure your settings match your server. I'm gonna flip back over here to my configuration. I'll kind of show you down the line the kind of things you're looking for. Like dev ton here in the user configuration, lines up with device mode ton over here. And then we got our cipher, which is our encryption cipher down here, encryption algorithm. It should match that exactly. Auth is SHA-1, and that's the auth digest algorithm. TLS client, that will happen automatically. Resolve retry infinite. If you want that, I thought we had a checkbox for it, but I'm not. There we go. Server host name resolution infinitely resolve server. And if you're connecting by host name, that is a good option to check. But if you're connecting by IP address, it's not going to matter a whole lot. So you could have a line that says proto UDP, or you could have a line like this where it has remote, and it's got remote, and then it has your server IP address, which is going to be your server host or address right here. This 1194 after this here, the number right after the IP address or host name is your port number. So that will be the server port. The server port here. The local port's something different. You want almost 99.99999% of the time. This is going to be left blank. But the number here is going to be your server port, and then the UDP there is your protocol up here, UDP. Now, if there are multiple remote lines, you could copy the additional remote lines into your advanced options, just separate them with a semicolon. You can just copy them as is. The verify X509 name, we don't have a good way to replicate that in our GUI at the moment, but you can add that as a custom option if you want. And assert type server, I can't remember if we did that in the background or not, but it's not supremely critical, but if you want to do that, you could add that after. It's basically just trying to make sure that the server certificate you're connecting to is actually a server, or the server you're connecting to has a server certificate, and that server certificate matches the common name you expect. Basically verifying that the server is actually a server, and the server is the one you expect. Otherwise, somebody who had a user certificate from the same CA could try to step in and impersonate the server. And even though it's valid on the same CA, you want to make sure you don't do that. All right, so comp LZO, yes. That is going to be the same as your compression setting over here. And that would just be enabled with adaptive compression is what you'd want there. Or you could do with or without, but most of the time you're going to want adaptive compression. If there's no comp LZO line, you could do disabled no compression. Though, and there are some rare cases where I think in 233 we've got another option which actually has disabled with or disabled and adaptive compression disabled or something to that effect. I think it's over here. Let me show you what that looks like. If the server is something crazy that doesn't even have compression compiled in, then you would want to use this here. No preference and adaptive compression disabled, but you'll have to wait for 233 or 24 for that. It's a very rare circumstance when you'd need that, but it's something to be on the lookout for if they don't have a comp LZO line at all and the server has LZO compiled out. So there's the CA, the certificate, and the key, and the TLS key down here, which you'll have when you go to make this client, you'll have a box that says, enable TLS authentication, and another one that says automatically generate key. If you have a TLS key, you want to uncheck the automatically generate box and then copy and paste in your TLS auth key. If they don't have TLS authentication, just uncheck this enable box here. If you've got a username and password, you plop it right here in the user authentication settings and then confirm the password. One thing I didn't mention here, if you do not have a user certificate, you do have to fill in the username and password, but then on your client certificate, you can pick none. But if you do have the user certificate, you can pick your CA no matter what, and then you pick your VPN provider user cert there, or none if you have only a username and password. So that should be pretty much it for the client. A lot of these settings will be provided automatically by the server. Tunnel network, you can leave that blank unless the provider tells you to set something there with the ifconfig command. You don't want to set that. Remote networks, you don't have to really worry about that. That most of the time they're either going to be pushing you a default route, which you may or may not want, or you're only going to want to send things across there, certain things across there with policy routing. The remote networks will let you work a little bit. I'll talk about that more a little bit later, but lets you selectively route a couple of destinations if you want. But it's not as convenient as doing it with policy routing, but it does affect the firewall itself as well. There's a couple of the settings you may or may not want. Your topology has to match the server, or they could push you the value. If you might just want to leave that on subnet unless you know it's going to be net 30, or if it doesn't work on subnet, you have to try net 30. But they should tell you that, and the push will override this. So if they push it. Your type of service, if you're running VoIP, you might want to do that. But if you expose the type of service bit out onto the outer packet, it is giving a little bit more information to a potential traffic interceptor about what type of traffic it is, but the QoS in between may make it worth it for you. The don't pull routes box here, I've got that checked. What that is your server could be pushing you a new default route, and you may or may not want that. In this case, I don't want that, but if you want to reroute traffic from the firewall itself, or if you want it to happen by default, then yeah, you would want to do that. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. Or the don't add or remove routes automatically. It's similar to this, but if you uncheck don't pull routes and you do check this one, you can pass your own script in a custom option to do something special with routes on your own. So that's another thing you could do, but most people don't bother with that. It's kind of an advanced thing. So there might be a couple of options left in that you can put into the custom options. Most of the time you can just leave it blank, but it depends on what they've put there or what's left over. Anything like verb or engine or persist, things like that, you probably don't need to worry about setting because either we set them automatically already, or we have other knobs for them in the GUI, or they're just not worth worrying about. There are a couple of things that might be necessary, like a TLS. If they have a TLS-cipher line, you might have to put that in because they may be specifying something a little bit different. There could be some other, auth or encryption option that they're putting in there, MSS, MTU type things that you may want to put in. But you just have to make sure the options, any options like that, are in that box. They're separated by a semicolon, one option, then semicolon, option, semicolon, and so on. All right, so after you've done all that, click Save, and you'll have your client saved. Then you can go over to the OpenVPN status, and you'll see whether or not it's up. If it's up, great. We can start checking it out and making sure everything works. If it's not up, then you have to go back and kind of change up your configuration a little bit. Make sure you've got all the right settings. check the logs, see if you're getting any hint about what might be wrong. But usually it's going to be something simple like you've got the wrong port number or the wrong IP address or the wrong encryption setting or wrong compression setting, something like that. It's going to be a pretty obvious thing in most cases. But moving right along, since we've got this up, your next step is going to be to assign this as an interface, which is going to have several advantages for us. When you assign an OpenVPN interface instance as an interface, it adds it just under your interfaces menu, and you get a tab just for that VPN under Firewall and Rules. The rules that you have there get reply to on them, meaning that if traffic comes in that VPN, the return traffic will go back out that VPN. So if for some reason you're able to get like a port forward in, that port forward return traffic is going to exit back out the VPN, which is the only way that's going to work. Otherwise, if you don't have that reply to on those rules, your traffic is going to come in that way, hit something local, and exit back out your default gateway. And if that's not your VPN, then the whole connection breaks down. You also get a gateway under System and Routing, and that gateway entry is for the far side of the VPN, and you can use that for policy routing. You can use it in gateway groups. Having that interface there also allows it to be selected elsewhere in the GUI. You could maybe even have like a DNS entry on it, something like that. Just makes it so it promotes it up a little bit so it works like most other interfaces. It also allows more fine-grained control of port forwards and outbound NAT for the VPN, rather than placing an outbound NAT rule on every OpenVPN instance of on your router. If you say you've got servers and clients and things, you really don't want that. So in this case, it lets you put an outbound NAT rule just on this particular VPN, which is very helpful. All right, so how do we actually do this? You go up here to Interfaces and Assign. Your OpenVPN client is going to be down here in this list of available network ports. You just pick it there and click Add. And then you'll see it come down here. It'll say like opt1 or opt2 or something else, but over here it'll say, OVPN C1. It'll have your description for your VPN. And then after you got that line there, you just go up here to Interfaces, and then you hit that particular interface name, whether it's opt2, opt5, or whatever. You can enable the interface, give it a description. I called this VPN WAN. You could call it, WAN VPN, VPN client, whatever you want to call it. Or you could even name it after the provider you're connecting to, if that helps you. You want to leave these IPv4 and IPv6 configuration types left on none, because we do not want pfSense to try to configure these, because those will be handled by OpenVPN internally. And all these other options you can just leave at default. You don't really want to change anything else. Just enable it, give it a name, boom. So after that, you save it, and then you apply the changes on that. And when you do that, the initial assignment and saving that interface is going to disrupt your VPN. So afterwards, you got to come back here to VPN and OpenVPN, back on the Clients tab, edit this guy, and then save. That'll just give your VPN a kick after it's been assigned. That way OpenVPN can reconfigure the interface, make sure all the routes and everything else are right, because that initial assignment is going to step on some of that. All right, so now that's all done. We check, make sure our VPN client is still up, everything is looking good. So now we've got our VPN client created, we have our interface there, and we're ready to move on. So talk a moment about outbound NAT. We are going to want to NAT our traffic before it leaves. If you don't NAT your traffic before it leaves, then the far side is going to see your LAN subnet directly, which if it's something you're hosting yourself, yeah, sure, you could do NAT on the far side. But if it's a VPN provider or a network you don't trust, you don't want them to see your LAN network. And if they do see your LAN network, they're not going to have a route back to that. So it's just going to break. So you need to NAT before it leaves your firewall. So how you do that, an automatic outbound NAT's not going to cover this. Even though we assign the interface, it's really not going to happen automatically, because the vast majority of scenarios using OpenVPN in this capacity, even with assigned interfaces, are still site-to-site VPNs, and doing automatic outbound NAT in that case would break those. So we did it this way because it's very easy to accommodate with a hybrid outbound NAT rule, which I'll show you here in a second. But the opposite scenario is a lot harder to work around. So so you do have to add Outbound NAT in this case. So we just go over here to Firewall NAT on the Outbound tab. Now, if you're on automatic Outbound NAT, the easiest thing to do by far is just switch over to hybrid Outbound NAT. Now, if you do hybrid Outbound NAT, you get all your benefits of automatic Outbound NAT, plus you get to add your own custom rules here. So what you do here, in this case, you just add a rule up here in the mappings area. If you're on manual Outbound NAT, same thing. You just add a rule up here in the mappings area. You just don't have the automatic Outbound NAT, you know, your other stuff. But if you're on manual Outbound, you already knew that. So we go to hybrid, and you just make a new rule. I'm just going to edit the one I've already got. Set your interface to your VPN. Make sure it's set to any protocol. For your network, you can put your LAN network here. I like to just use an RFC 1918 alias because it covers anything private, and I'm lazy. That way, if I add more networks later, I don't have to worry about going back and adding more outbound NAT rules. It just NATs everything. Now, that could be good and bad. It could be good because it's easy, and you know, anything private behind you is probably private. But in a more complicated network, that may not make a lot of sense. You may want to be more specific to be more secure. You could have something private coming in from another direction that maybe you don't want to NAT out this way. But you know, then again, in those kinds of scenarios, you may not be using a VPN provider in this way on that firewall. So kind of a trade-off, convenience versus security as always. But I prefer to do it this way because there's less to go wrong. And at least in the kind of cases where I've seen these used before, it's not going to be a significant issue otherwise. So for your source, I've got this RFC 1918. You could have your LAN network. You could have you know, a larger subnet that includes, you know, all of your local networks if you want. It's up to you, whatever you need. Translations, just set to interface address. And I just put a description here, NAT out the VPN. Kind of boring. That's all there is to it for outbound NAT. As long as you're on hybrid, make sure you're on hybrid mode, and then save, and then add your rule, and save, and then apply. And now that should take care of your outbound NAT. So, and your rules are going to end up looking sort of similar to your rules down here. You know, you could, you know, add another, you know, a static port rule for port 500 UDP for IPsec, but odds are you're not going to be running IPsec inside of the OpenVPN. I mean, you could, but doesn't make a ton of sense, but hey, you could. If you have something else you might need static port for, you could set up static port NAT rules, or, you know, basically, you know, whatever NAT you need, you know, add it on the VPN just like you would on your WAN. So that's pretty easy for most cases. You don't have to worry about it too much. Just add that one rule and you're done. All right, so talk about firewall rules. A lot of people, myself included, have been kind of, I don't want to say lazy, but they've taken a little bit of a shortcut when it comes to firewall rules on OpenVPN. If you've got an OpenVPN server, odds are you probably have an allow all rule in that OpenVPN. And that can be really dangerous when it comes time to do a VPN provider, because that would allow anything from the VPN provider to come into you on you know, to the firewall, and you don't want to let them do that because now this is a WAN and you don't really trust that other far side network. You may have some trust for them because you're partnered up with them, you're paying them whatever, but you still don't want to let a potential attacker from that side come in and hit you. So you really need to make sure you get rid of any allow all rules on the OpenVPN tab, and make sure that you have you know, specific source rules. And you're saying, you know, well, why do we have this other interface tab if we have to worry about these? Well, the OpenVPN tab acts like an interface group, and your interface tab is processed after that. So you have your OpenVPN tab rules; those all get processed first, and then your rule tab your interface tab rules get processed after the group rules. So you really don't want to allow all on either place, but your rules on the OpenVPN tab have to not block but not match the other traffic. So on your OpenVPN tab, if you have a site-to-site VPN, you would need to make sure that you only allow from sources that are on the other side of your site-to-site VPN, whether that's even like an RFC 1918 alias, it could be okay, depending on what your VPN provider is using. something along those lines. You just need to be very specific with your sources. So I don't know, it's just you need to keep an eye on security there, because even if that provider network is private, quote unquote, you really don't want to let them back into you. Even if they could just hit your firewall GUI or your firewall SSH, whatever, some service on your firewall, don't let them do it. It's just not necessary, and it's best to be secure and just don't do it. Another option you could do is if you have other VPNs, you could assign all of your OpenVPN VPNs as tabs and have no rules on the OpenVPN tab. In this particular case, I'm just treating it like a WAN. I've only got this one OpenVPN instance, just the client, so I've got nothing on OpenVPN, and I've got nothing on my other VPN WAN either. So just need to be careful with your specific sources there. And so because this OpenVPN tab is processed first, nothing you do on your interface tab can override things that happen on your OpenVPN tab. If you block something on your OpenVPN tab, you can't decide to pass that later on your VPN interface tab. So yeah, it's you got to make sure that things just are not matched at all by the OpenVPN tab in order for them to be matched by your interface tab rules. It's a little bit of a tricky concept, but something you need to spend some time looking at to make sure you're not allowing too much in. Okay, failover scenarios, which can be good for some people and other people consider them dangerous. It's all up to you and what your requirements are and how you think your VPN should work. So if you want your things to prefer the VPN, if the VPN is down, you don't mind them going out the WAN. So to do that, you could create a gateway group, and that would just be under System and Routing on your Gateway Groups tab. And as you see here, I've got a group here with my VPN on Tier 1 and my WAN on Tier 2. So any traffic I have set to match this, match traffic and use this as a gateway, it's going to use the VPN. If the VPN is down for some reason, that will go out the WAN, which is good for connectivity, but bad for security and privacy. So it depends on what you're doing there. If you are really strict and you have a device that you want to only ever use the VPN, and if your VPN is down, they get no connectivity at all, there's a couple of components you have to do there. The first is you have to go to System Advanced on the Miscellaneous tab, and you have to check this option here, do not create rules when the gateway is down. So then how that works is when you do the policy route, like here for this, the Chromecast rules I've got selected here, it will use the VPN and only the VPN here. And if that VPN is down, it will act like this rule does not exist. So it follows through and hits this reject rule. So you have your rule to pass from this device out the VPN. Immediately underneath that, the same rule, but to reject without the gateway. And then that way, combined with that do not create rules when the gateway is down option, that will get you the lack of failover that will give you the extra security in that particular scenario. So that just makes sure that make sure no other rules can match that traffic, because if you have that rule and you have that option set, it could fall through to something else and end up flowing out a way you don't expect. So that's why you need both that pass rule with the gateway and immediately under it the reject rule to make sure that it's going to do exactly what you want. So kind of mixed up that and policy routing a little bit, because really that's what you do here. Like this one here, I've got a VPN user's alias and I want them to prefer the VPN. So for that, I'm passing on the LAN, address family IPv4, protocol any, and for my source, I've just got my alias here. Then I just hit display advanced, scroll all the way down here to the gateway option here, and I just have the prefer VPN gateway selected there. And you'll see your VPN gateway and your gateway group, if you made one, will be in here separately. So looking at this list and reading it down, the other one works similar. So if a VPN user in this group hits this rule, it's going to prefer the VPN. If the WAN is down, it's just going to go out, or if the VPN is down, it's just going to go straight out the WAN. Next one down it checks would be Chromecast. If that Chromecast device is going out and the VPN is up, it's going to go out the VPN and only the VPN. If the VPN is down, this rule will not exist. It'll hit this and get rejected. Everybody else just goes straight out the WAN. Now you could take the default policy and you could have your default LAN rule go out the VPN. If you do something like that, if you have other VPNs or you have other local networks, say you've got a local DMZ or a VoIP subnet or something, you need to pass your traffic to them with rules above, above your other interfaces here, or above your other rules. So at the top, you'd have something so like pass from LAN net to VoIP interface or VoIP subnet, whatever, or pass from LAN subnet to the other end of your site-to-site VPN network. So you'd have all those up on top of any policy routing rules, and then your default LAN rule or whatever, it could prefer the VPN or use just the VPN gateway to your heart's content. So that's all the same stuff. So yeah, just match what you want, send it out however you want, and you just need to make sure that you're matching it right. Usually when things like this don't work right, it's either because you're not matching the right source, so you might have to set it like a static IP address for something on your local network to make sure you're matching it right. You may be matching the wrong protocol. Instead of choosing any protocol, you might have just chosen TCP, or you might have just chosen UDP or something. Whatever you're using could be using a different protocol than you expect. Even if you chose TCP UDP, it could be using some other completely different protocol. So you need to make sure that you're matching the traffic correctly, matching it, the right source, the right protocol, everything, and sending it out the right ports. You could have a rule that just does like all web browsing out the VPN. So you could have a source of any maybe and destination port of an alias containing 443 and 80 or 8080 or whatever ones you want, and have that use the VPN. So you can match anything you want any way you want like that, as long as you can express it in a firewall rule, match it, send it down a gateway, off it goes. Now that's all well and good for traffic on the LAN, but what about traffic on the firewall itself, which, for some cases doesn't matter, but for the extra security you might want it to. Mostly we're talking about DNS traffic from the resolver or forwarder, especially the resolver in its default resolver mode. Things like firmware updates, package installations, traffic from proxies like Squid, things like that. It's all going to follow the default route of the firewall, and the default route is just going to normally just be out your WAN. If your provider is pushing you that default route, or if you manually set a default route to go out the VPN, then that traffic is going to go out the VPN instead. So, depending on what you want, you may want that default route out the VPN, you may not. So if you don't want that, you can use that don't pull routes option on the OpenVPN client page to make sure that you don't get it. If they don't send it to you, or if you have don't pull and you want to set it manually on your own, you can use the advanced option of redirect gateway def1, like I've shown here. And that will set a route that looks a little bit different than you might be used to. Do not try to set the default gateway using the gateway entry under system routing. That's not going to work, and that could break other things. So you have the route, how it's going to look in the OpenVPN table. OpenVPN, when it uses that redirect gateway def1, it puts it in a special way. It puts it in as 0.0.0.0/1 and 128.0.0.0/1. And those two entries will cover the entire IP space, IPv4 space. And it does it that way because doing it that way does not stomp the system's actual default route. So, like your VPN traffic is still going to go out your default route, which is what you want. I mean, the traffic for the VPN tunnel itself, the OpenVPN traffic is going to go out that way. And when that route goes away, with the WAN disconnects, your default route is still going to be there, and that will get used instead. So these two more specific routes get put in there, and they'll work as a default route. So if you see those routes in your routing table, odds are they came from OpenVPN and you know redirecting your gateway. Um, so you have that if you want to route everything, or if, say there's only certain specific things that you want to route across the VPN, like your VPN provider DNS servers. You're best off to put those in your remote network box on the client page, especially like provider DNS servers. You won't just put them in the remote network box, separated by commas, IP address, blah, 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 comma, blah, 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 comma, blah, blah, blah. So you can have all those in your remote networks, and that will make sure that the traffic will go out that VPN toward those networks, even if you don't have some other way to put it there. So the firewall itself will send it out that way too. Okay, so something that's I don't want to say a hot topic, but some people are concerned about it is DNS leaks. So what that means is, say your clients are on your LAN, their traffic is supposed to go out the VPN, but they're hitting the firewall for DNS, and that firewall DNS traffic is just going out your WAN. So so the upstream DNS servers are going to be able to see your true WAN address, because that's where that DNS query came from, and then your client went out the VPN. So they're going to see that things came from two different directions potentially, depending on how you query that domain, and it could leak your true WAN address out there, and in the process can degrade the amount of privacy you have, or it could trigger the provider you're connecting to. They couldn't realize that you're trying to get around region bypassing. So if your DNS query came from the United States, but your client actually came from the UK, for example, they could see that disconnect and say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. You're coming from the United States, not over here. So that's something that you want to prevent in those cases. So the easiest way to do that for clients is to just have the clients use their DNS server specifically or directly. So make sure that, even if they're just using 8888 and 8844, make sure that traffic hits a policy routing rule. It's going to send it out the VPN. And then that way, the client, your firewall can't leak anything, because your firewall isn't acting as a DNS server, just the clients, and they're going out the VPN. So that works just fine that way. So if you're talking about the firewall itself too, if your DNS resolver is in non-forwarding mode, so in resolver mode, it's going to go out and talk to the root DNS servers and authoritative DNS servers directly. So it's going to follow your default route. So in that case, you have to set up that default route over the VPN, like we just mentioned on the previous slide. Then that way, your firewall DNS queries will start, going out the VPN as well. So the DNS forwarding, if you're in the DNS forwarder or the DNS resolver in forwarding mode, you could list your VPN provider DNS servers first under system in general. You can make sure you've got your remote network set up or your routing set up this way. It's better to do it in the remote networks, because depending on when things get applied, if you set it under system in general and you set the gateway there, it's probably not going to do the right thing like you expect. I listed it here because some people say it works for them, but I don't trust doing it that way. So you have that set up, your DNS to go out that way, and it's going to use those DNS servers specifically. If you're using the DNS forwarder, there's an option to query the server sequentially that you want to set, because otherwise it's going to send a query to all of your DNS servers at the same time, and if any one of those servers is not your VPN provider, then it's going to break. Now, where this kind of all falls apart is if your DNS provider, if you connect to them by host name, not IP address, you need a working DNS server for the firewall itself before the VPN connects. And so you have to make sure that you have that set right. So ideally, you just connect to the provider by IP address if you can, but if you have to connect by host name, it gets a little trickier. Then you're better off with like the DNS resolver. Let's see. All right, so inbound traffic. If we have inbound traffic, you're talking about like a port forward coming in from your provider, which that's really up to your provider and what they support. I know there's a couple of them out there that require like an API call or something or they have an app that forwards in a random port to you. We don't have a way to accommodate that right now. If we were to partner up with a provider that did something like that, we might have, some inside knowledge on how to set that up with them in a way to include some code here and there. But at the moment, it's really hit and miss, and we don't know, how reliable their things are. So we don't want to try to code something against one of those providers and then that provider disappear tomorrow. So so if you have something like that, unfortunately at the moment you can't do that. But if they have some sort of a static setup where they forward a known port into you, you could set up a port forward. I don't have an example of that set up here, but it looks like any other port forward. You just put the port forward on your VPN interface and then forward it in. And the same troubleshooting steps here apply to this as it would to a regular one. If you're testing your inbound traffic to that port that you know is forwarded in, check your state table, make sure there's an entry there, check your packet captures, see that. Now, you have a higher chance of this working, obviously, if you're hosting your own because you know what you're setting up. So if you've got, a port you're forwarding in from your server side, forward it across the VPN, and then you're on the other side of the VPN, you forward that into a host on the LAN. And because of the reply to keyword on those rules, I mentioned that'll all work. I'm not going to get too deep into this because it's not that common to see in the wild, and most people don't. There's not really a reason that people would end up wanting that, except for maybe like torrenting or something. They absolutely had to listen. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about hosting your own here. This is really just peer-to-peer SSL TLS server or remote access TLS DNS or remote access SSL TLS server. And like I've got it set up over here on the servers tab, it's really just a one that I set up with the wizard quite some time back. So you can really use any of the non-pre-shared key modes. You can do peer-to-peer SSL TLS or remote access SSL TLS or user auth alone or certs plus auth. You can be as secure as you want there. And I just did remote access because it's a little bit easier to accommodate this type of scenario. If you were going to do NAT on the server side instead of the client side, you would also need to set up client-specific overrides, and have your remote networks in the override and your remote networks in the server set for the LAN on the client side. That's a bit more complicated. We have docs for that online for setting up an SSL TLS site-to-site. You can set up that portion of it. On the one hand, it's nice to do single NAT instead of double NAT, but it makes your server setup a lot more difficult and a little bit less flexible with what you can do over there. So generally just like to do it on the client side because it's a lot easier. And also doing it on the client side, you can keep your same sort of VPN setup for this standard, but even between road warriors and other firewalls. So it's up to you what you want to do there. Like I said, you could set this up with the wizard. That's what I did over here. It was really simple. You can just set it up with the wizard and change a little bit after. Outbound NAT on the server side of things. If you're on automatic outbound NAT and you're using a server on here, that picks that subnet up automatically. If you need to, you could always go to hybrid or manual outbound NAT and add a rule to cover that, like I covered earlier. Let's see, and your VPN rules on the server can be a little bit more relaxed because this is going to be traffic coming in from your clients to the server side. And so here I was kind of lazy, but your source really should be like your tunnel networks for the VPN. Or you could have RFC 1918, something like that. That's not really a big giant concern there because this is your traffic coming from your clients in. Your destination has to be any if they're going out to the internet. That's really the important part, is making sure your destination is right. Because if you only have a destination set to get to your LAN, they're not going to be able to get to the internet. So if you have some weird mix of site-to-site and remote access traffic coming through here, your rules on this tab could get fairly complicated because you probably want them to get to the internet, but you may not want them to get to everything internally. So you might have some rules to pass to what they need to get to on your LAN, on DMZ, whatever, and then some rules to block them from reaching things they shouldn't be able to reach, and then that rule to pass them to any to allow them out to the internet. If your client is going to be using your server-side firewall as a DNS server, and your server over here is using the DNS resolver, you have to add them into an access list under services and DNS resolver and access list, just to be sure they're going to be allowed through, especially if it's like your LAN network on the far side, and you're doing the routing option instead of the NAT option. You can add an access list name, choose the allow action, then put in the far side LAN network or your OpenVPN tunnel network, and then it'll allow that through. If you're using the forwarder, there's no concerns there. It just works. So and that's really it. Let's see. I see somebody's asking. I was showing the configuration on pfSense. I was showing it over here the whole time as I was doing it. I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure when you connected what you saw, but really that's it. So you got you go to your certificates. You import your CA. You import your user certificate. You go over to your VPN. Set up your client. You set up you assign that as you assign the interface. Set up your rules and NAT, and your gateways are already be there. If you want to set up your gateway groups, you can do that. Otherwise, you can just policy route it out. So that's about all there is to it. I don't know if anybody had any questions. We can open it up for questions. Sometimes it can take a bit to type a question out. So if you do have a question and you think it's going to be a lengthy one to type out, just type something, let me know you're going so I don't skip it. Let's see, set only certain hosts to go through the VPN based on MAC address. You cannot filter based on MAC address. You could set a DHCP static mapping for that MAC address to give it a static IP address and then match that static IP address out and use that for the VPN, but you can't filter based on MAC address directly. Let's see, recap on how to use the best performance. So UDP, no encryption if feasible. Do you need to use TUN, MTU, MSS? Whether or not you need to tune the MTU MSS is really between you and your provider and the links between you. Most of the time you don't, because OpenVPN is good at setting one that is good for all around, but you might have to be wary of that. If you see some large transfers or large packets getting dropped or fragmented, you may need to tune that down a little bit. Most of the time you don't, but definitely UDP. No encryption if feasible. That really is kind of crazy to do no encryption. It would get you better performance, but I wouldn't want to. Most of your point here is going to be for trying to encrypt that to stop it from going through. There are going to be some people who purely want to do routing and they really don't care because it's internet traffic, but that would get you better performance. If your provider supports it, you can do that, but I don't know. That's up to you. I wouldn't do that. I would just at least use something weak. But you'd have to be on either really low-end hardware trying to get a lot of performance out of it, or a really, really high-end connection to worry about it that much. All right, let's see, Damien, let's see, what's the difference between the interface you added and the OpenVPN one? Are you talking about like here in the NAT rules or on like the interface tabs? Like in your interface tabs, your firewall rules, this OpenVPN group tab has rules that will match any VPN. Same thing with your OpenVPN choice and your NAT rules. That will match any VPN, and these rules are processed first. And then if nothing matches in these rules, it will fall through and check your interface tabs. And then it will let you have rules just for this VPN that are not going to be applied to any other VPN. So say you've got 3 VPNs and these rules are only going to apply to this specific one. Your OpenVPN tab rules will apply to all of them, including this one, but they get processed first. If you're talking about on NAT rules, like an outbound NAT, if you add an outbound NAT rule on an interface of OpenVPN, that will apply to all of your VPNs, servers, clients, whatever. As traffic left any of those VPNs, it would get NAT applied, which is what you really probably wouldn't want most of the time, unless this is your only VPN. So most of the time you do not want to use OpenVPN for the interface because it's a group, not a specific choice. Let's see. Oh, show us how to apply a static DHCP mapping for that purpose. Oh, sure. So I did cover DHCP and all of that stuff in the Hangout last month. So if you really want the details on this, you can refer back to last month's Hangout in the archive. But just to show you real quick, here under your DHCP server, I have, for example, I put in the MAC address of one of my virtual machines, and I gave it this specific IP address. And you can see how that looks here. It's just the MAC address and then the IP address. And I put in the host name and description. You can put as much or as little stuff in here as you want. And then after that's there, you save that entry. You may have to restart the client or, at least, release and renew on the client. And then you could either use this IP address directly in a rule, or like in my case, I have those aliases already set up. I could just take that address and add it to my VPN user's alias. And then now that VM will match that rule and go out that way. Alternately, we could go here to rules on my LAN tab. And now that I know that address, I could add that up at the top. I could pass from any protocol, single host, using that. Come down here and pick the gateway on it as the VPN. And I used this button here to add to the top. Because these rules are parsed from the top down and the first match wins, you'll want your more specific rules up at the top. Okay, somebody's asking, remote back to pfSense Firewall from a remote client, example, remote from my laptop at work to a home network. Depends on what you're trying to get to. Most of the time, you could maybe do that with a port forward, but you wouldn't want to. OpenVPN would do well for that. You could even use the same kind of OpenVPN server I'm showing you here. That would be more of a remote access type situation, which we have. There were 2 different Hangouts just several months back where we covered a bunch of different remote access VPN options. Odds are what you want to do is covered on part 1 or part 2 of that. But you really do want to use a VPN for that, because the amount of vulnerabilities and things that are found these days is just atrocious. So especially if you have like a DVR or something like that at your home network or your remote network, you really want to be running that stuff over a VPN. You don't want to use port forwards. So even if your protocol is encrypted, like our RDP or something like that, you don't want to expose that service to the internet. Okay. Somebody is asking, IP and GRE useful for tunneling. Really, the reason we haven't really done much with those, well, we don't have anything in the GUI to support IP for routing. We do have GRE, but it's so dead simple. There's really nothing to go over. I mean, it works just like any other interface. Once you set up the GRE and assign it, then it's, you get a gateway, you can route to it, you can policy route, you could do it just like this. Once you set up the GRE and assign it, most of this Hangout, the same things I'm telling you would apply to that. Except, you skip the OpenVPN setup and just set up a GRE tunnel. We haven't really covered it separately because there's not much to cover. It's just dead simple. Works or it doesn't. And let's see. So can I have 2 IP addresses on the LAN interface? One goes through WAN, the other through OpenVPN. Yeah, that's sort of what I was showing you here on the rules that I've got set up right here. If you want something to use just the WAN, you can push it through and just use the default gateway, or you can specifically tell it the WAN gateway. So let me add another rule here and show you any traffic from, let's say, a single host source of .11, just to give you an example. 11 out WAN. Stranger things have happened there. So let's, on a gateway, let's to make sure that, no matter what default route tricks we're doing here. Let's force this out our WAN. We'll force it out the WAN gateway. And so now you see we've got, if anything comes in from .11, it's going to go out the WAN gateway. And then down here, .10 is going to go out the VPN. Anybody in the VPN users is going to prefer the VPN, fail back to the WAN. This Chromecast only goes out the VPN. You get the idea. So it's all a matter of matching the traffic as you want, and telling it what you want, telling the firewall what you want that traffic to do. And again, you want to order your rules so that you have your more specific ones, like just single IP addresses up at the top, and then anything that covers like an alias or a chunk, under those. So you're matching from the top down. First match wins. Okay. If that wasn't your question, can you rephrase it a little bit, because it sounds like that's what it was. I've got one IP address on the LAN that goes through the WAN, one IP address on the WAN that goes through VPN, or on the LAN that goes through the VPN. Let's see, what hardware priorities to increase performance, mainly CPU? Currently with OpenVPN, about the only thing you can do is toss more CPU horsepower at it. It does not take as much advantage of encryption acceleration as we'd like, and it has some inefficiencies in the way it gets handled. There's a lot of context switches as the traffic gets passed between the user space and the kernel and the IP stack. So it's kind of inefficient. So really the only thing you do is throw more horsepower at it. Let's see, somebody asking about VLANs, lag, and trunking in a future hangout. I'd have to go back and look. I thought we had one on VLANs. The problem with doing a hangout on VLANs, lags, and trunking is that most of that is going to rely on your switches, and every switch is going to be different. So we could maybe touch a little bit on the pfSense side of that, but that really is like 5 minutes. There's not a whole lot there. All right, Eric, you're saying from a client on the LAN, you choose a gateway address or one. The client itself can't choose its own gateway, but I mean, you're the same, you could, if you're talking about one IP address on the LAN trying to send to 2 different destinations, you can match that in a rule and send things differently. I guess I'm still not quite following what you're asking there, Eric. I'm sorry. From a client on the LAN, choose gateway address 1 or 2, and then go through WAN or VPN. So you want to have two different things on the firewall. They send traffic one way, it goes out the VPN. The other way goes out WAN. No, that you can't do that on here. There's no way for the firewall to know which address the thing entered. You could have clients in 2 different subnets. Like you could have 2 different access point SSIDs on 2 different VLANs, and then somebody could hook up into one SSID so there'd be 2 different interfaces on pfSense essentially. You could have, they could connect to your insecure SSID, and then all traffic on the insecure SSID goes out WAN, or they could switch over to your secure SSID, and that secure SSID would go out your WAN. Because to pfSense, that would look as 2 different interfaces on 2 different VLANs, however you set that up. But you couldn't have that all in one flat network. Okay, can I please repeat how to prevent the firewall itself not using the VPN as default gateway? There's 2 different ways you can do that. The first thing you need to do is on your OpenVPN and your client, you need to make sure that you have don't pull routes checked. That will stop the provider from, even if they push you a default route, this box will tell your firewall not to use it. It will ignore it. And if you have a custom option, anywhere in custom options, if it says redirect gateway def1, erase that. That would be setting up a default route. If you have don't pull and you don't have a redirect, then the firewall, it can't use that VPN as your default route. You'll be fine. Let's see. Can you apply high availability rules to OpenVPN as a WAN concept? High availability. Are you talking about now, Bob? Are you talking about like a HA cluster, like you've got 2 firewalls, or are you talking about multi-WAN? Oh, 2 firewalls, that would work just the same as this, really, except your interface, the interface you're choosing would be uh, your WAN side carp VIP would be your OpenVPN interface. And there really wouldn't be much else different. I mean, your NAT wouldn't need to have anything special for that, because your NAT would still be natting to the VPN interface address, because the carp's only, or the OpenVPN is only going to be active on one node at a time. You can't make a conflict that way. So really, just set your WAN client to use the carp VIP for its interface, and the rest of it would be pretty much identical, I think, or exactly identical. Let's see. Can you load balance if you create 2 WAN VPNs? If yes, how? Yes, you can. If you have, say, 2 different VPN providers or 2 connections to 2 different VPN provider servers, they will each get a gateway. If you assign them both, and if they're both assigned and you have gateways for both, then all you would have to do is go into system routing and your gateway groups and make a gateway group with both of your VPN gateways on the same tier. So if you have like your VPN WAN 1 on tier 1 and VPN WAN 2 also on tier 1, then it will load balance the connections across those VPNs just as if they were 2 WANs. Nothing special about that at all. Just add your second client, assign your second client's interface, and then set up your gateway group, and then use that gateway group in the traffic you're matching on your LAN. Easy as can be. Let's see. I saw you said you don't need to specify a tunnel network on the client configuration for the VPN provider. Would this be the same when connecting to pfSense site to site? It depends on your setup. If you are using a static key setup, you need to specify the tunnel network on both sides. If you're using SSL TLS with a /30 size tunnel network, then yes, you have to set it on both sides. If you're using an SSL TLS site to set up, like say you've got a server and a bunch of clients and they all connect to the server, and you've got like a /24 tunnel network, then no, the clients don't have to set the tunnel network. The server will push them the tunnel network. Let's see. My provider only allows connections with redirect gateway def1 set. If I remove it, the connection cannot establish. Can I prevent that the firewall uses it? I have never seen that in practice. I don't know how they'd even be detecting that. I guess the client does send some of its options over. I suppose in your client, if you have this option set, you could leave the option in your configuration and then check don't add or remove routes. That might stop them from actually happening in the operating system, even though it's in your configuration. That would be the first thing I would try. All right. Anything else? Any more questions? Going once? I think we pretty much covered just about everything. So, all right. Okay. Well, I think we'll call it then. It's been a pleasure being here this month, and we'll see you again next month. And have fun using your new VPN providers. I hope you all find one that works out for you. And we don't have a topic for next month yet, but we're still looking for one. And we will see you back here at the end of November.